And I wish I had a great story for this one, and I don't. I can't remember how we came on Jim Henson. The one thing I remember is that I was on his Wikipedia page, and I don't remember how I got there. I wish I could remember that part, because that would be a really great story. But I was on his Wikipedia page, and I had read something on the page, and I thought, oh gosh, I wonder where they got that. So I go down to the bottom to look at the reference. Like, anybody references anything on Wikipedia? But I found out later Muppet fans are really good about that. And I went down to the bottom of the page, and it was Jim Henson The Works, and Jim Henson Designs and Doodles, and it was tons and tons of stuff about his work, but there was nothing about him. So I called my agent, and I said, you know, this seems to be low-hanging fruit to me if no one's done Jim Henson. Is there a Robert Caro out there that's been doing him for 25 years or something, and we don't know about this? And he said, well, let me see what I can find. And he came back and said, no, you know, there's nothing's been sold, there's nothing in the works. And so I live in Montgomery County, Maryland, and Jim Henson grew up in the next county over from me. So I went to the University of Maryland. So I went over to the University of Maryland where there's a Jim Henson archives, and I met with the archivist over there who handles the film department, and we were having a conversation about Jim and his contributions to the culture, and I said to him, well, given everything we've talked about, why is there no biography of him? Thinking he's going to say, well, I've been at work on the biography of Jim Henson for the last 20 years. And he said, you know, I don't know the answer to that. And I said, so do you know anybody in the Henson company maybe that I could talk to about this? And he gave me a contact within the Jim Henson Legacy, which is the company that Jim's widow and some of his business associates set up to promote Jim, not just the Muppets. And I had an email that I nursed for 2 or 3 weeks before I finally sent it off to their executive director, who fortunately had been Jim's publicist during his lifetime. And so when I explained to him that Jim's agent had just recently died and his head writer just recently died, this guy really got that, like right away, understood it was probably time to tell the story. And as I found out later, Jane, his widow, had cancer. So I think she sort of got it as well. But that started the discussion, which then took 2.5 years before they finally said, okay, we think we'll let you do this. So that was another one that after the first book, I wasn't necessarily sure we were going to do the second, and then it took a long time. I mean, Washington Irving came out in 2008. Jim Henson didn't come out until 2013. But of that gap in there, half of that time we're sort of getting to know the family and the family getting to know me. And what finally happened with that is we had gone back and forth a long time, sending emails, and I had gone to meet with people, and I talked with Lisa Henson in Burbank, and I talked with Jane in New York, and it was talking with their executive director and the archivist and so on, but I hadn't gotten a yes. I would get a yes, and I'd get, well, no, wait, or maybe, oh, this might be a good idea, and it just kept changing. So finally, I told them, you guys are our Hollywood family. Let me give you an audition tape. Now, it wasn't me on camera doing anything like this, but I went down to the Library of Congress here, and I pulled every article I could find on Jim when he was growing up here, because he got into television on the local NBC station here in 1954. He was still in high school, and then on into college at the University of Maryland. So I pulled all these little weird articles that had shown up in the Arlington newspaper, and then he was getting pressed in the Washington Post. He was that good, and again, it's like I said earlier, you sort of grab everything you can and push it together and see what you can come up with. And I found all these different people calling him a genius at age 17, and I found all these sources, and I wrote a chapter about Jim teaching himself puppetry and going down to audition at CBS and getting the job down there. And I did a little research on the history of television. I did some research on the history of puppetry on TV. What did a puppet show look like when Kukla, Fran, and Ollie were doing it? So I could put all this information into this chapter, which was really long. But I sent that to them and said, this is the way I would do this. I want Jim to tell the story as much as he can. I want it in the immediate moment. I don't want to be looking back. I want the reader knowing what Jim was going through and telling it that way. So I sent that off to the family, and that was the opening I needed. They read that and they said, okay, we get it. We can see you're not up to shenanigans here. We see how you would do this. That's the way we would like to see it done as well. And a lot of that work actually ended up in the final book. I had to cut a lot of it out, but the chapter in there, you'll see I fell in love with the research on the history of television. There's still a little bit on there on the history of TV, but that went on for pages and pages because I loved that research. But that's the kind of stuff you do to make your case, and then ends up in the book. And you tend to over-research everything. But that was what actually kicked the door open for the Hensons. And once that happened, you're sort of a made man with them. You go in, and what I really wanted out of them was their archives, because Jim's papers aren't held at the University of Maryland. They're not at the University of Connecticut, where the big puppetry program is. They're privately held. They're in the Jim Henson Company's archives in Long Island. So I really wanted to get my hands on that. That was, I thought, the way to do it. And Lisa Henson had asked me, she said, if we tell you no, are you going to do this? And I said, I'm not sure I could, because I really want those papers. And so once I had them on board, I could get those papers, and that was huge. And so I researched that book sort of the old-fashioned way. I would sit in the archives for 2 weeks at a time, and I would go through every folder, and I'd take every piece of paper out, and I would turn it over to see what somebody might have written on the back where they didn't think anyone would be looking, and found a lot of really neat stuff that way, and a lot of really neat stories to tell that way. So that was the old-fashioned, butt in the chair for weeks at a time. But the other thing it got me was the access to, I would say, I would really love to get Frank Oz. Nobody gets Frank Oz. They got me Frank Oz. I could get all the Muppet performers, and I could find people in London, and so it really helped track down the people I needed for that book.